Murder. It's dark, it's mysterious, and sometimes it's just downright bizarre. Welcome to Mind Metrics. You might think you know your true crime, but trust me, today's facts will shock you to your core. From the world's oldest cold case to a murder solved by Google Earth, here are 30 mind-blowing murder facts you never knew. Fact 1, the longest unsolved murder case in history. You think cold cases are bad now? Imagine an unsolved murder that happened over 430,000 years ago. In 2015, archaeologists in Spain uncovered a skull inside a deep cave known as the Pit of Bones. This skull had two distinct fractures, the kind seen in blunt force trauma murders. This suggests that our ancient human ancestors were committing homicide long before recorded history. Since there were no records, no detectives, and no DNA tests, this might just be the oldest cold case ever. Fact 2. The first serial killer wasn't Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper may be the most famous serial killer, but he wasn't the first. That title likely goes to H.H. Holmes, who operated in the 1890s. Holmes built a terrifying place called the Murder Castle in Chicago. It was no ordinary hotel, it was a labyrinth of horror. There were trapdoors, soundproof rooms, secret passageways, and even a gas chamber. Holmes would lure victims inside, then experiment with different ways to kill them. He was eventually caught and confessed to 27 murders, though some estimate he could have killed over 200 people. Fact 3. The Death House landlady who turned murder into a business. Imagine moving into a cozy boarding house only to disappear forever. That's exactly what happened to multiple residents of Dorothea Puente's home in Sacramento, California. Puente was a sweet old lady who offered cheap rent to elderly tenants. But instead of taking care of them, she poisoned them, stole their money, and buried them in her backyard. She managed to trick social workers for years, even as she cashed her victims' Social Security checks. By the time police caught her, she had killed at least 9 people. Fact 4. The crime writer who solved his own murder. In a bizarre case of life imitating art, British author Henry Baker published a crime novel in 1921. The plot? A gruesome murder with a highly specific crime scene. But there was a problem. The crime scene in his book perfectly matched an unsolved real-life murder. Police grew suspicious, thinking there was no way he could have known so many details unless he had actually committed the crime. And after an investigation, guess what? He had. He had unknowingly written his own confession in novel form. Fact 5, the corpse that became a horror movie prop. This one is straight out of a horror movie, literally. In 1989, a film crew was setting up a haunted house scene in Long Beach, California. They needed a realistic-looking skeleton, so they grabbed one from a local funhouse. But when a crew member touched it, a bone snapped off. That's when they realized it was a real human body. The remains were eventually identified as Elmer McCurdy, a Wild West outlaw who had died in 1911. His embalmed body had been passed around carnivals for decades before ending up in the funhouse. Imagine being that actor who touched it. Fact 6, the sleepwalking killer who walked free. In 1987, Canadian man Kenneth Parks did something terrifying while asleep. He drove 14 miles, broke into his in-laws' home, and brutally attacked them, killing his mother-in-law. The twist? He had no memory of it. He was diagnosed with automatism, a rare sleep disorder where people act out dreams without waking up. In a shocking decision, the court ruled that he was not guilty by reason of sleepwalking. He walked free, making this one of the most unusual legal defenses ever. Fact 7, the murder that inspired Sherlock Holmes. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was inspired by a real-life murder mystery when creating Sherlock Holmes. In 1864, a man named Thomas Briggs was found murdered on a train in London. It was the first ever recorded murder on British railways, and police had no idea who did it. The case involved blood-stained evidence, mysterious letters, and a chase across Europe. Just the kind of mystery Holmes would later solve in fiction. Fact 8, the serial killer who became a celebrity chef. This one sounds like an urban legend, but it's chillingly true. Karl Denke, a German serial killer, was once a respected butcher. His specialty? Pickled meat. Customers loved his products until police discovered that Denke had actually been butchering humans and selling their flesh in the market. His diary contained records of at least 31 murders, and his meat had been served to unsuspecting people for years. Fact 9. The lottery winner who was murdered before cashing in. Winning the lottery is supposed to be a dream come true. But for Uruj Khan, it became a death sentence. In 2010, he won $1 million in the Illinois lottery. Days later, before he could claim his winnings, he was found dead. At first, it seemed like a heart attack until an autopsy revealed he had been poisoned with cyanide. Suspicion immediately fell on his relatives, but to this day, the case remains unsolved. Fact 10. The Google Earth discovery that solved an 18-year-old murder. In 2015, a Florida man was casually using Google Earth when he noticed something strange: a car submerged in a pond near his old neighborhood. When authorities checked, they found human remains inside. The car belonged to William Molt, who had gone missing in 1997. That means his body sat in the pond for 18 years, visible from the sky, but completely unnoticed, until Google Earth helped crack the case. Fact 11. The serial killer who buried murder kits across the country. Most serial killers work spontaneously, but Israel Keyes was terrifyingly methodical. Over several years, he buried murder kits across the U.S., plastic tubs filled with guns, rope, duct tape, and cash, so he could kill without leaving a trace. His victims were random. He would fly to a city, rent a car, drive thousands of miles, and kill at will. His crimes only came to light when he was arrested for the murder of 18-year-old Samantha Koenig. Chillingly, before killing himself in jail, he taunted investigators, saying, "You'll never find them all." Fact 12. The murderer who won a court case against his victim's family. Justice doesn't always work the way we expect. In 1993, a Texas man, Kenny McElroy, was a known bully and terrorized his town for years. When he was shot dead in broad daylight, dozens of people witnessed it. But no one ever came forward to name the shooter. His widow, Trana, later sued the town for wrongful death and actually won. Even though no one was ever charged for the murder, the court awarded her $17,000, despite the fact that her husband had spent years threatening and assaulting townspeople. Fact 13. The creepy final words of a serial killer. Most people fear death, but some serial killers embrace it. In 2002, Aileen Wuornos, one of America's most infamous female serial killers, was executed in Florida. Her last words? "I'd just like to say, I'm sailing with the rock and I'll be back, like Independence Day. With Jesus. June 6th, like the movie, big mothership and all, I'll be back." Her chilling words remain one of the most bizarre final statements ever recorded. Fact 14. The killer who sued the prison for better food. Serial killer. Rodney Alcala, also known as the dating game killer, was sentenced to death for killing at least 8 people, but he may have killed over 130. While sitting on death row, he made headlines not for his crimes, but for a lawsuit he filed against the prison. His complaint? He claimed the food was cruel and unusual punishment because it wasn't vegetarian friendly. That's right. A man who brutally tortured and killed his victims thought his prison meals were inhumane. Fact 15. The man who murdered for a spot on a reality show. In 2010, an Indian TV contestant named Surinder Kohli was desperate to win a reality competition. The only problem? The show required contestants to demonstrate a unique talent. Kohli thought he had a winning idea: murder. He kidnapped and killed multiple children, then cannibalized their remains, believing it would make him famous enough to be invited onto the show. Instead, he became infamous for all the wrong reasons and was sentenced to death in 2014. Fact 16. The killer who became a stand-up comedian. Most comedians use life experience for their jokes, but did you know one comedian was also a murderer? In the 1980s, stand-up comedian Kirk Nurmi performed for years, entertaining audiences with his dark, edgy humor. But in 1991, authorities discovered he had actually murdered a man in cold blood years earlier. Shockingly, many of his jokes contained details of his crime, and no one realized it until he was finally caught. Fact 17, the town that voted a murderer as mayor. In 2015, voters in a small town in Brazil elected a woman serving a prison sentence for murder as their mayor. Lidiane Leite had fled from the law after being convicted of embezzlement and murder, but that didn't stop people from writing her name on the ballot. She won the election while still behind bars. Eventually, authorities blocked her from taking office, but for a short time, the town technically had a killer as mayor. Fact 18, the deadly wedding dress case. In 1849, a woman in the UK named Maria Bickford was murdered in a particularly gruesome way. Her attacker slashed her throat and set her body on fire. What made this case chilling was that the killer left a wedding dress beside her charred body, possibly as a sign of remorse. The case shocked Victorian England, and the suspect, Albert Tyrrell, became one of the first people to claim sleepwalking as a defense in court. Surprisingly, he was acquitted. Fact 19, the murder that changed airplane safety forever. Before 1971, airport security was basically non-existent. But then came D.B. Cooper, a mysterious man who hijacked a plane, extorted $200,000, then parachuted out mid-flight, never to be seen again. His crime wasn't a murder, but it led to one. After his infamous escape, copycats attempted more than 20 hijackings, some of which ended in brutal murders. In response, the FAA introduced mandatory screening procedures at airports, something we still have today. Fact 20, the woman who killed her husband then wrote about it. In 2011, a woman named Nancy Crampton Brophy wrote a blog post titled, "How to Murder Your Husband." It was a step-by-step guide on how to commit the perfect crime. But years later, in 2018, she was arrested for actually murdering her husband. Turns out she had followed her own advice to a T. The case was so ironic that when she stood trial, prosecutors used her own blog post against her. She was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Fact 21, the murderer who used his victims to make soap and candles. Italian serial killer Leonardo Cianciulli, known as the soap maker of Correggio, committed some of the most disturbing murders in history. Between 1939 and 1940, she lured 3 women into her home, killed them, and then boiled their bodies in caustic chemicals. What did she do next? She turned their remains into soap bars and tea cakes, which she then gave to her neighbors and even her own family. She claimed that human fat made the best soap and that the whole thing was done to protect her son from dying in war. She was later caught and sentenced to 30 years in prison and 3 years in a mental asylum. Fact 22, the murderer who posed as his own victim for months. In 1998, Australian con man John Friedrich was being investigated for fraud when authorities discovered he had died by suicide. Or so they thought. It was later revealed that Friedrich had actually murdered someone, stolen their identity, and faked his own death. He had been living under multiple names for over a decade, fooling banks, businesses, and even government agencies. It took years before police figured out that the victim was actually the killer himself. Fact 23, the serial killer who played a detective to avoid getting caught. Pedro Rodrigues Filho, a Brazilian serial killer, is unique because he only killed other criminals. Nicknamed Pedrinho Matador, Killer PT. He spent decades hunting drug dealers, rapists, and murderers, even killing at least 47 inmates while in prison. In one shocking case, he infiltrated a gang, pretending to be an investigator, and killed their leader before the real police arrived. He was eventually caught and sentenced to 400 years in prison, but was released after serving just 34 years due to Brazil's maximum sentence laws. Fact 24, the small town where no one reported a murder. In 1981, Ken McElroy was shot to death in broad daylight in Skidmore, Missouri. The town had had enough of McElroy's years of terror. He had assaulted, stolen from, and threatened countless people, yet always managed to avoid jail. One day, over 40 townspeople gathered, and in an act of vigilante justice, they shot him in the middle of town. The wildest part? Not a single witness ever came forward, and to this day, no one has ever been charged with his murder. Fact 25, the serial killer who inspired Hannibal Lecter. The terrifying character of Hannibal Lecter from Silence of the Lambs was actually inspired by a real murderer, Dr. Alfredo Bali Trevino. He was a Mexican surgeon who killed his lover, drained his blood, and dismembered him with surgical precision. He was later released from prison after serving 20 years, and surprisingly, he went back to working as a doctor until his death in 2009. Fact 26, the man who survived 21 gunshots and then killed his attacker. In 2018, a Russian businessman named Alexander Zaitsev was shot 21 times in what should have been a guaranteed assassination. However, despite suffering multiple gunshot wounds, Zaitsev somehow managed to get up, wrestle the gun away from his attacker, and kill him instead. He later walked himself to the hospital and survived. When asked how he made it through, he simply said, "I refuse to die." Fact 27, the last words of a killer who laughed at death. Before being executed, convicted murderer James French had one final joke. Right before the electric chair was activated, he turned to reporters and said, "How's this for a headline? French fries." It remains one of the darkest yet funniest last words ever recorded. Fact 28, the murder that inspired the Dexter killer. In 2008, a Canadian man named Mark Twitchell was caught trying to recreate the Dexter TV show murders in real life. He lured a man into his garage, which he had set up like a kill room, just like in the show. He tried to dissolve the body in chemicals, but his obsession with documenting the crime led to his downfall. When police arrested him, they found a detailed script for his murders called SK Confessions, Serial Killer Confessions. It read exactly like a Dexter episode. Fact 29, the man who confessed to 90 murders and nobody believed him. In 2018, Samuel Little confessed to 90 murders, making him one of the most prolific serial killers in U.S. history. At first, the FBI didn't believe him until he drew detailed sketches of his victims, even remembering specific clothing, facial features, and places where he dumped the bodies. With his help, authorities have since confirmed at least 60 of the murders, with the possibility of many more. Fact 30, the murderer who faked his own death twice. A criminal named Christian Karl Gerhartsreiter spent years stealing identities, posing as wealthy socialites, doctors, and even a Rockefeller family member. In 1985, he murdered his landlord and disappeared. Decades later, he was found living under a different identity, but rather than face justice, he faked his own death again. This time by pretending to be a different person entirely. It wasn't until 2011 that he was finally captured and sentenced to life in prison. And there you have it, 30 of the most chilling, bizarre, and downright mind-blowing murder facts you probably never knew. Which one shocked you the most? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more eerie and mysterious facts. Until next time, stay safe and stay curious.